Zara didn't just slip up, it got caught, and the fallout is uglier than anyone expected. The brand that taught the world to chase trends at lightning speed is now facing a production scandal so disturbing it's forcing shoppers to ask a question they've avoided for years. What does it really cost to look fashionable?
An estimated 93 million tons go to landfill or are burned every year.
And that's roughly about a garbage truckload of textiles every second going to landfill.
In the next few minutes, you're going to see how Zara's race to stay trendy may be powered by exploited labor, environmental shortcuts, and a system designed to hide the truth in plain sight. This matters to you because if you've ever bought a Zara jacket, a Zara dress, or even just scrolled past one on Instagram and thought, that's cute and affordable, you're already part of this story. And by the end of this video, you may never look at fast fashion the same way again. The brand built on speed, and why that speed is the problem. Zara didn't become a global fashion giant by accident. It became powerful by mastering one thing better than anyone else: speed. While traditional fashion brands take months to design, manufacture, and ship new collections, Zara can move from sketch to store rack in as little as 2 weeks. That's not innovation, that's pressure. And someone, somewhere, is always paying the price for that speed. This ultra-fast model made Zara a cultural icon. New trends drop constantly. Shelves change weekly. Shoppers feel that addictive rush of scarcity. Buy it now or it's gone forever. But behind that thrill is a production system that doesn't slow down, doesn't rest, and doesn't leave room for mistakes or humanity. The scandal exploding right now isn't about a single factory or one bad decision, it's about a pattern. Investigations, worker testimonies, and watchdog reports have been pointing to the same uncomfortable truth for years. Zara's supply chain is stretched so thin that exploitation isn't a bug in the system, it's a feature. And now, shoppers are finally connecting the dots inside the factories they don't want you to see. Let's be clear about something up front. Zara doesn't make its own clothes. Like most fast fashion brands, it outsources production to hundreds of factories across countries like Bangladesh, India, Turkey, Morocco, and parts of South America. On paper, Zara claims strict ethical standards. In reality, those standards often collapse the moment no one is watching. Workers in these factories have reported long shifts that stretch far beyond legal limits. We're talking 12, 14, sometimes 16-hour days during peak demand. Over time, that's technically optional, but refusing it can mean losing your job. Wages that barely meet, or sometimes fall below, local minimum standards, and workplaces where safety is treated like a luxury, not a requirement. In some documented cases, workers producing garments later traced back to Zara described cramped rooms, poor ventilation, and intense pressure to meet impossible deadlines. When trends change overnight, factories are forced to respond instantly. That urgency doesn't magically disappear by the time it reaches the sewing floor. It lands squarely on the backs of workers who are already vulnerable. And here's the part that makes shoppers furious. Zara often claims ignorance. The brand points fingers at subcontractors, who point fingers at subcontractors beneath them. Responsibility gets diluted until it practically vanishes. Meanwhile, the clothes still end up neatly folded under bright lights, tagged with prices that feel suspiciously low, the outsourcing loophole that keeps them clean. This is where the scandal gets even darker. Zara's business model relies heavily on a system of subcontracting that creates just enough distance to deny accountability. Officially, Zara works with approved suppliers. Unofficially, those suppliers often outsource work again, sometimes to unregistered workshops, operating entirely under the radar. These hidden workshops are where some of the worst abuses are reported. No inspections, no audits, no protections. In certain regions, investigators have found workers being paid per piece instead of per hour, meaning if they slow down or make mistakes, they simply don't earn enough to survive. There have even been cases where garments linked to Zara were traced back to informal workshops using migrant labor, people with no legal protections, no bargaining power, and no voice. Workers who are unlikely to complain because doing so could cost them everything. This isn't a coincidence. It's a system designed to move blame downward while profits move upward. When affordable starts to feel like a lie. Let's pause for a second and talk about you, the shopper, because this scandal hits harder when you realize how carefully Zara's prices are engineered to mess with your perception. A $29 dress feels reasonable. A $19 top feels harmless. You tell yourself, I'll only wear it a few times anyway. That's exactly the mindset fast fashion depends on. Zara doesn't want you to think about durability, ethics, or longevity. It wants you to think about now. But affordability is an illusion when the real costs are simply hidden. Someone else pays for that low price with exhaustion, unsafe conditions, or wages that don't cover rent. The environment pays with polluted water and mountains of textile waste. And eventually, you pay too by constantly replacing clothes that were never built to last. The anger from shoppers right now isn't just about guilt, it's about betrayal. People are realizing they weren't just buying clothes, they were buying into a story, one that turns out to be carefully scripted. Environmental damage, the other half of the scandal. If the labor issues weren't enough, Zara's production scandal also drags the environment into the spotlight. Fast fashion and sustainability are fundamentally incompatible, and Zara is no exception. No matter how many eco-conscious labels they roll out, producing massive volumes of clothing at high speed means massive resource consumption. Cotton requires enormous amounts of water. Synthetic fabrics, like polyester, are made from fossil fuels and shed microplastics every time they're washed. Dyeing processes dump chemicals into rivers near manufacturing hubs, poisoning ecosystems and communities downstream. Zara has pledged sustainability goals, but critics argue those promises barely scratch the surface. When you're releasing tens of thousands of new designs every year, recycling a small percentage of fabrics doesn't offset the damage. It just looks good in a press release, and shoppers are starting to see through it. Greenwashing, saying the right things while changing nothing. One of the reasons this scandal has ignited so much backlash is because Zara has spent years presenting itself as a brand that cares. Eco-collections, sustainability pages, carefully worded commitments about ethical sourcing. But when activists and journalists look closer, the numbers don't add up. Using slightly more organic cotton doesn't cancel out overproduction. Promising future improvements doesn't help workers being underpaid right now. And publishing glossy sustainability reports doesn't mean much when transparency stops exactly where real accountability should begin. This gap between what Zara says and what evidence suggests is happening has left shoppers feeling manipulated. People don't like being lied to, especially when the truth involves human suffering. Why shoppers are finally snapping. So why now? Why is this scandal hitting harder than all the others before it? Because consumers are tired of rising prices, tired of clothes falling apart after a few washes, tired of being told they can't afford ethical fashion while billion-dollar brands rake in profits, and most of all, tired of being treated like they're too distracted to notice. Social media has played a huge role. Workers are sharing stories. Investigations spread faster than PR teams can contain them. A single viral post can undo years of brand image in hours, and Zara, once praised for being on trend, is now trending for all the wrong reasons. Shoppers aren't just disappointed, they're angry. Angry that they were never given the full story. Angry that affordability came at such a high cost. Angry that a brand they trusted may have been cutting corners in ways that directly harm people and the planet. And this anger isn't fading, it's growing. The bigger question no one can ignore anymore. At the center of this scandal is a question that goes far beyond Zara. How much exploitation are we willing to tolerate for convenience and cheap fashion? Fast fashion didn't become powerful on its own. It grew because consumers were encouraged to buy more often, without asking questions. But now, those questions are impossible to ignore. Every tag, every price, every new arrival comes with an unspoken backstory. Zara's production scandal isn't just exposing one brand, it's exposing an entire system that relies on speed, secrecy, and silence. And once you see it, you can't unsee it, because the truth is, fashion was never meant to move this fast. And when it does, something or someone always breaks. And once something breaks, the damage doesn't stay hidden forever. Whistleblowers, lawsuits, and the stories that refuse to stay quiet. What really poured gasoline on this scandal wasn't just another report or activist tweet. It was people inside the system finally speaking up. Former factory workers, labor advocates, and even suppliers began telling stories that lined up a little too well. Different countries, different factories, same patterns. In several high-profile cases, workers claimed they were producing Zara garments under conditions that violated local labor laws, missed wages, illegal overtime, intimidation when they complained. Some said supervisors openly warned them not to speak to inspectors. Others described factories that suddenly cleaned up or temporarily reduced hours whenever audits were announced in advance. That last detail is crucial because Many of Zara's independent audits are scheduled. Factories know when inspectors are coming. They know exactly how to stage a performance. And when the auditors leave, everything snaps right back to normal. In some regions, legal action followed. Workers demanded unpaid wages. Advocacy groups traced specific garments sold in Zara stores back to factories accused of abuse. The brand's response was almost always the same: deny direct responsibility, promise an internal review, quietly cut ties with a supplier once the press attention got too loud. But cutting ties doesn't fix the harm already done, and it certainly doesn't prevent it from happening again somewhere else. The power imbalance that keeps workers trapped. To really understand why this keeps happening, you have to understand the power imbalance baked into fast fashion. Zara is massive. When it places an order, factories don't negotiate. They comply. If they don't meet the deadline or hit the target price, they risk losing the contract. And losing a contract with a brand like Zara can mean shutting down entirely. So factories cut corners. They squeeze workers. They subcontract without permission. They push people beyond human limits because the alternative is financial collapse. And the workers, they have even less leverage. Many are migrants. Many are women supporting families. Many live paycheck to paycheck with no savings and no safety net. Walking away isn't a real option when unemployment means hunger. This is why the argument "just don't work there" completely misses the point. When entire local economies are built around garment production, workers don't have a menu of ethical job options. They take what they can get, and Zara knows this. Why Zara's fast model makes abuse more likely than ever. Here's something that doesn't get talked about enough. Zara's business model doesn't just allow exploitation, it encourages it. Traditional fashion brands plan collections months in advance. Factories have time to schedule shifts, source materials, and manage workloads. Zara doesn't operate like that. It thrives on unpredictability. Designs change constantly based on real-time sales data. A jacket goes viral, produce more immediately. A dress flops, cancel it overnight. That volatility pushes chaos down the supply chain. Factories are forced to respond instantly, often without extra resources. That's when overtime spikes. That's when safety checks get skipped. That's when workers sleep in factories or work through the night to meet deadlines that were never part of the original agreement. Speed becomes a weapon. And while Zara markets this agility as innovation, workers experience it as instability, a constant state of emergency where there's always another rush order, another impossible target, another threat of losing work if they fall behind. The disposable clothing problem. Nobody wants to admit. Now let's talk about what happens after the clothes leave the store. Zara's garments aren't designed to last. That's not an accident, it's strategy. When trends change weekly, durability becomes a liability. If clothes lasted too long, you wouldn't need to come back as often. So fabrics are thinner, seams are weaker, construction is just good enough to survive a handful of wears. And when the item inevitably loses shape, fades, or tears, it quietly exits your wardrobe. Where does it go? Most fast fashion ends up in landfills or incinerators. Even donated clothing often can't be resold because the quality is too poor. Synthetic fibers don't biodegrade. They sit in the environment for decades, breaking down into microplastics that enter water systems and food chains. In other words, Zara's production scandal doesn't end at the factory door. It follows the garment all the way to the trash heap and beyond. Why just recycle it doesn't solve anything. Zara loves to promote recycling initiatives, drop-off bins, circular fashion campaigns, promises of a greener future. But here's the uncomfortable truth. Textile recycling at scale is largely a myth. Most clothes are made from blended fabrics that are extremely difficult and expensive to recycle. Separating polyester from cotton requires technology that isn't widely available. As a result, only a tiny fraction of garments are actually turned into new clothing. The rest downcycled into insulation, cleaning rags, or simply dumped. Recycling programs often function more as guilt relief for consumers than real solutions. They make you feel better about buying more, which conveniently keeps the system running. Critics argue that Zara's sustainability messaging distracts from the core issue: overproduction. You can't recycle your way out of a business model that relies on endless consumption. Social media didn't create the outrage, it amplified it. Zara didn't suddenly become unethical. What changed is visibility. Workers have smartphones now. Activists have platforms. Consumers have access to information that used to be buried in academic reports or ignored by mainstream media. A leaked photo from a factory floor can circle the world in minutes. A TikTok breakdown of a brand's supply chain can rack up millions of views overnight. And once people start talking, silence looks suspicious. Zara's carefully polished image struggles to survive in this environment. Corporate statements feel hollow when real people are sharing lived experiences. And shoppers are no longer content with vague assurances that steps are being taken. They want receipts, they want proof, they want accountability. The psychological shift happening in consumers right now. This scandal is part of a larger shift in how people relate to fashion. For years, shopping was framed as harmless fun, a little retail therapy, a way to express yourself. But as prices rise and quality drops, that illusion is cracking. Consumers are starting to notice that they're spending more money for clothes that last less time. They're noticing that affordable doesn't feel affordable when items need constant replacing. And once they learn about the human and environmental cost behind the scenes, the enjoyment starts to sour. That's where anger comes in. Anger at brands for exploiting trust, anger at a system that normalizes excess, anger at being told this is the only way fashion can exist, and that anger is powerful. Why this isn't just a Zara problem? It's important to say this clearly. Zara is not alone. The entire fast fashion industry operates on similar principles: speed, volume, low costs, minimal transparency. Zara just happens to be one of the most influential players, which means its choices ripple outward. When Zara demands lower prices and faster turnarounds, competitors feel pressure to do the same. Suppliers adjust expectations. Labor standards erode across the board. The race to the bottom accelerates. So when shoppers turn their frustration towards Zara, they're also pushing back against a system that has been normalized for far too long. What accountability would actually look like? Real accountability isn't a new marketing campaign or a carefully worded apology. It's structural change. It looks like slowing down production schedules so factories aren't constantly in crisis mode. It looks like paying suppliers enough to cover fair wages without cutting corners. It looks like unannounced audits conducted by truly independent bodies. It looks like full transparency, not selective disclosure. Most importantly, it looks like producing less. And that's the part brands fear the most, because producing less means selling less, and selling less challenges a business model built on endless growth. The uncomfortable truth: brands don't want shoppers to realize. Here's the truth that sits at the heart of this entire scandal. Fast fashion only exists because we're told it's normal. Normal to buy clothes weekly. Normal to wear something twice and toss it. Normal to chase trends that expire faster than milk. But normal doesn't mean inevitable. For decades, fashion moved slower. People owned fewer clothes. Garments were repaired, altered, and reused. Style wasn't disposable. The current system isn't the only option. It's just the most profitable. And once consumers truly internalize that, brands lose their greatest shield: indifference. What happens next, and why? This moment matters. Zara's production scandal feels like a tipping point because it's colliding with something bigger than fashion: rising living costs, climate anxiety, growing distrust of corporations. A generation that's tired of being sold narratives instead of truth. Shoppers are no longer asking, "Is this cute?" They're asking, "Who made this? What did it cost them? Why is it so cheap?" Those questions are dangerous for fast fashion because once you start asking them, shopping stops being mindless. It becomes intentional, and intentional consumers are much harder to manipulate. Zara can weather bad press. It has before, but what it can't easily fix is a cultural shift where people stop believing the fantasy, the choice. Every shopper is quietly being forced to make. This scandal isn't about guilt, it's about awareness. No one expects consumers to be perfect, but awareness changes behavior. Once you know the system is broken, participating in it feels different. Every purchase becomes a small decision: convenience or conscience, trend or longevity, quantity or quality. And those decisions, multiplied across millions of people, are what ultimately force industries to change. Zara's production scandal didn't just expose factory conditions, it exposed a truth many shoppers were already feeling in their gut: that something about fast fashion doesn't sit right anymore. The question now isn't whether people are furious, it's whether that fury turns into action. Because if it does, this won't just be another scandal that fades with the next trend cycle. It'll be the moment fast fashion started to lose its grip. So now, the question isn't whether Zara messed up. The question is what happens next, and what you do with this information. Because once you know how the system works, shopping stops being passive. That cheap price doesn't feel so cheap anymore. And suddenly, that impulse buy comes with a pause, a second thought, a moment of awareness. This isn't about guilt. No one's perfect. We've all bought into fast fashion at some point. This is about power, because whether brands admit it or not, consumers shape the future more than any PR statement ever could. If enough people slow down, buy less, and start asking uncomfortable questions, brands are forced to listen, not because they care, but because they have to. So now I want to hear from you. Has this changed the way you see Zara or fast fashion in general? Do you think real change is possible, or is the system too far gone? Drop your thoughts thoughts in the comments. Let's actually talk about it. And if this video opened your eyes, hit like, subscribe, and share it with someone who still thinks fast fashion is harmless. Because the more people see the truth, the harder it becomes to hide it.